August 5th, 2012 was one of the deadliest hate crimes committed on U.S. soil in nearly 50 years in a place of worship by an affiliated white supremacist. Um, and sadly to say, since August 5th, 2012, there has been tragedy after tragedy in places of worship and in other places that have far surpassed that. My personal journey in this country began when I was 6 years old. I came from a small rural farming village in India called Dugal. Um, we moved to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and oftentimes I think Milwaukee, Wisconsin is much like Rochester. And I think to my parents, I'm like, why did you move from a very tropical place, hot place? You know how the weather is here. Uh, and they moved us to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. At that time in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, there was quite a bit of opportunities. And as I was trying to get the history of Rochester, and just you know, the history of a lot of places is similar to that of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. In the 1970s, 1980s, there was an abundance of jobs for blue collar labor. There was uh, a welcoming atmosphere that existed at that time for first generation, second generation immigrants to come and really create a life. Um, and shortly after we got to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, a lot of those same jobs that we came there for started to leave town. And sort of this employment exodus that was happening. And that led to Milwaukee being the way that it became later on. But as I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, I grew up with a sense of deep appreciation. And oftentimes, your parents will kind of ask you, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" And Indian parents are no different. So now next week is Thanksgiving, and we'll go back and we'll have family gatherings, and we'll typically ask our children. We don't care if they're like 2 years old. We're like, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And Indian, I don't know if this is the same in all households, but in Indian Punjabi households, your parents secretly wish that you would just say, "I want to be a doctor. I want to be a engineer." What I told my parents was, "I want to be of service." They were like, "Man, we are gonna have to support this boy for the rest of his life." So that was kind of the appreciation that I grew up as a first generation immigrant, and really just understanding the immigrant journey, but the immigrant sort of gratitude that is instilled within immigrant children. Really is this. I think right now, speaking of politics and things like that, uh, I feel the need to be able to speak up for immigrants and just the deep appreciation that they have for this country and to serve and to give back because there's this universal dream that we all have, whether we are black, brown, whether we are rich, poor, whether we are from this country or whether we're born in another place and we come here. And that's to create a life that's better for our children than the one that we would have led. And it's our responsibility to do so. And so, everyone here, if you're a parent or if you're a student or if you're from a high school, a middle school, a college, that's the universal dream of betterment. We all have a responsibility to leave out these doors today and really not just be inspired by what is said here, but be committed. And commitment takes us renegotiating and saying, what am I doing? What am I not doing? And really, that was how my parents kind of grew up and instilled. And really, by the time that August 5th, 2012 happened, there was a feeling that they had achieved their American dream. They felt like that they had made it. My father was joking around. At that time, he was 65 years old, and he celebrated the last day that I saw my father live would be my birthday, well, it would be August 3rd. And he was joking around that day of just retirement and Social Security. And he was like, this country is just phenomenal because you work your entire life, and at 65, they start to pay you. He enjoyed that for a month. And he really had just made a great life for our family, for himself, until somebody who decided upon himself that somehow, some way, immigrants are not entitled this American dream. And not only are they not entitled this dream, but they're not worth this dream. They're not even worth being on the face of this earth. And that day, a white supremacist gunman took the lives of 6 people and then took his own life in a mass murder suicide, and really asked us the question, and not just us, not us as a small minority community of 6, but is asking us all, what are you all going to do about it? We all have a choice. What are we going to do about it? And that's a personal journey and also a very communal journey. So that day, I'm taking my daughter to Sunday school, and it was only the sort of the fortunate forgetfulness of a child that we turned back around to the house, and that I didn't have to make the decision of could I save my at that time my 7-year-old from a gunman inside of our place of worship. No father should have to decide that. But at that same time, when the incident was happening, we were just outside of the temple walls. Both my mother and my father are inside, and my mother is calling me frantic, and she's in the closet, and she's telling me, please get people inside, hurry up and get inside. Um, we're scared. We're inside the closet. There was 14 other people that were inside that closet hiding with her. Um, my father, uh, his final act was trying to fight off a gunman with a butter knife. And the exit door was really from here to the first pew right here. He could have left at any time, but he knew that my mother, the congregation that he helped build, he was the president, he was the temple president for nearly 15 years. He had built a congregation that started it with about 20 families and now is up to 3,000 families. He knew that he had a responsibility, and so he decided to fight this gunman, and he was the last one to be killed inside the temple before this gunman went outside and engaged in a firefight with a police officer. When this gunman engaged in this firefight with this police officer, they shot at one another, and the gunman hit the police officer and then shot him 14 more times from close range. That police officer was able to survive. After that, he engaged in a firefight with the next responding officer. But by that time, he was in such rage, the shooter was in such rage, that this firefight and what he was in, he was just consumed, and then he took his own life. That incident lasted about 6 minutes. The entirety of this incident lasted about 6 minutes. But it took the lives of so many people and affected an entire community, an entire minority community, to the point that even now, if I go around today, Sikhs from around the world have heard of this incident because they were affected as well. Communal violence is that way, is that sometimes when a minority group is targeted, there's a lot more of a communal effect because you see yourself in that minority group. So I knew at that time that there was a responsibility that I personally had. And I personally had it to say, okay, what does the logistics look like? I have to go start fundraisers because it's not like these women who lost their husband are going to be able to go out and find a job tomorrow. So I had to try to raise money. So we raised about $300,000 within the next week. And after we raised that money, we gave it to those families so those families could grieve. Then we set up some logistics on funerals so that they didn't have to worry about funeral costs. We set up other stuff. But as you're doing all of these things and putting on a brave face for the world, the difficult part is that you yourself are suffering, but you don't have the ability to grieve. So after that, when I really reached out to Arno, I think I was looking for answers. I was looking for someone to say, hey, this person did this because of this. Because law enforcement wasn't talking. Other people didn't know. The shooter was dead. And now who do you go and ask? And for me, I really needed to know why. Why would he target us? And the only person that I could think of was the person that started the same organization that shooter belonged to, which was Arno. The first time that we met, really, I think I was looking for an explanation. But 7.5 years later, 8 years later, I gained something much more valuable than an explanation, and that is an experience. And that's really been the experience of saying, how can we all inspire somebody to do better and be better, even in that moment where they're hurting? And really, the answer comes down to how do we lovingly challenge not only us, but how do we lovingly challenge one another to to come out of our comfort zones and be better.
And we managed to agree to have dinner the following Monday. And Pardeep was really relieved when I suggested my go-to restaurant in Milwaukee, which is Isan Thai Lao on Farwell Avenue. And he was relieved because
Well, in our minds, we always have stereotypes. Each and every one of us has stereotypes in our mind, and I was kind of judging from his response of where do you want to go eat, whether he was still a white supremacist or not, right? Because that's a question. I mean, you go around and you start to tell people 2 months later, I'm going to reach out to a former white supremacist. What does your family tell you? You're going through that. Yeah, you lost your mind, right? They start to question that, and enough people say that to you, you start to question that. You're like, maybe I have lost my mind. And so I was gauging from his response whether he was still a white supremacist or not. And then when he said Thai food, I was like, oh, thank God. And, in my mind, I was like, well, white people can barely handle spicy food. If if he's still a white supremacist, he wouldn't have chosen a Thai restaurant.
if I would have said, yeah, let's meet for bratwurst and sauerkraut with Wiener Schnitzel, like we would have never met.
We would have never met. Yeah, so I was glad he chose a Thai restaurant.
So we kind of pulled up there at the same time, and we both Googled each other. I didn't notice he was already there though. He saw me walking past, and it was like an October day around twilight. It was kind of the same kind of weather.
It's kind of like right now.
Yeah. And I'm like, I got a hoodie on, and I'm like stomping down the sidewalk, and he's like, all right, skip this. He's about to get on, like, oh, hey, my kids are sick. I can't make it. You had a thought.
Yeah, I had a thought. I mean, I was sitting there. I was kind of watching him, and we Google researched each other, so you kind of knew what the other one looked like. And he had his hood up, and he's walking. I'm like, man, okay, maybe you could just make up an excuse right now. And what do parents go to for the excuse? Yeah, my kids, they got sick. I couldn't make it. I didn't know that he had saw me already. But then there was something in me. There was something in me that was just like, no, you came here for a reason. And definitely, we don't want to minimize this part, but there was part of us and part of our journey together that was just spiritually saying, keep going forward. I know you're scared. I know you're worried, but have faith. Keep going forward. Now, I can't tell you what that all was, but I don't know. But there was something just saying, keep going. You came here for a reason. Get out of the car, put it in the park, get out of the car, and go meet him. And I remember I got out of the car and I got out, and one of my first thoughts when I saw him in this restaurant, he was flanked by two Asian waitresses next to him, and I was like, oh, thank God he didn't eat the two Asian waitresses. And I was like, bro, why would you even have a thought like that? Why would you think that this dude was going to eat two Asian waitresses? Oftentimes we got to be in tune with our subconscious and just be honest with it, right? We talk about implicit biases that we all have, and say, let's just be honest with it. And honestly, I was relieved that he didn't hurt them.
So, and I'm sitting there, the two Asian waitresses, Mary and King, are friends of mine. I knew very well. This is like my joint. I've been known to eat at this place 5 days a week. I actually not only like spicy food, I like battery acid, melt your face spicy. I quit drinking in 2004, so that's how I catch a buzz nowadays, is from Chili's. And I'm talking to Mary and King, but I'm kind of freaked out because I still don't know what I'm going to say to Pardeep. Like, hey, I'm Arno. Sorry about your dad. It just seemed hollow. I was totally at a loss. And because this is my place, I'm worried about I'm going to go to pieces. I'm going to be crying. This is going to be a big scene. I not only know Mary and King, but I know the owners. I know the chef. I know half the people in there. The party comes walking in. We seem to, on paper, be so different that we actually had so much more in common than we could possibly imagine. And as we sat down to talk, we talked about our daughters and we talked about our fathers. And over and over again, we saw that they had a lot of things in common. It was 4 hours later when King was tapping me on the shoulder going, Arno, we closed 45 minutes ago. Can you guys wrap it up. But that night, I knew that I had gained a brother, and I also knew that it was really important that we go out together and share our story just to really illustrate that point that human beings have so much more in common than otherwise. And we can come together and use that commonality as a foundation. There's no problem that we can't solve.
And that night, we started from a place of, I wanted an explanation. And sometimes what we do is we want explanations. Why did somebody do this? Why did somebody betray me that way? Somebody hurt me this way? And, sometimes we think that that's what we're looking for. Um, that's what I thought I was looking for. But starting from a place of empathy and everything that you guys all do, even as we're, oftentimes I hear people say, "Oh yes, I fell in love," or I'm inspired. Falling in love kind of denotes a losing control. Inspired kind of says, you know what, this was an inspirational talk. Me and Arno are not we're not inspirational speakers, right? We are commitment speakers. And so hopefully what we do today is commit to going forward, but commit to going forward and having a foundation of empathy. And then we can talk about some of these very contentious sort of topics that we're going to address. But that night, that evening, not that I knew it, but the spirit that was pushing me forward, that wanted an explanation, that I wanted an explanation, was said, okay, you know what? You're going to gain an experience and you're going to gain a brother. And right away, Arnold raised his hand and said, listen, you're never going to have to walk this path alone. I'll never, you're like, we'll keep telling this story and we'll keep the memory of these six people alive. And hopefully one day we have been able to reach those that other people would say are not reachable. We have been able to get to people who were, to some people, on the fringe, and hopefully keep people safe. And that's not just our responsibility, but that's all of our responsibility, is to find the next person out there who might be suffering, who might feel isolated, who might feel hurt and want to hurt other people. But it's our responsibility to go out and really be attuned and say, okay, what is that all about? I'm here for you. Uh, Not to say that you have to agree with them, but as we understand society and we understand people, we understand that we all have a responsibility to help heal some of the wounds of the past.
So I'm pretty stoked to be a human being. It's a pretty amazing thing. And there's all kinds of things that are amazing about being a human being. But one of my favorite ones is that every single one of us has the ability to find what we seek in life. Sometimes we're not even aware of this. But if we want to find reasons to be outraged, if we want to find reasons to be angry, if we want to find reasons to hate people, if we want to find reasons to hurt people, we will find those reasons everywhere we look. Nowadays, this is more true than ever. There are algorithms that say, "Oh, you like this? Here's more of that. You like that? Here, have some more of this." Uh, that's why it's so important that we're mindful of what we're looking for, because we can also look for reasons to love each other, look for reasons to not give up our faith in humanity. And to me, that's the way to establish justice in our society, to really bring about a society where all people are valued and included. We have to be mindful of what we're looking for every single day and keep guiding ourselves towards that beloved community, as Dr. King put it. And we do that when we are mindful of what we're looking for. We're essentially crafting the lens that we see the world through. I've found in my experience that the lens I look at the world through has a immediate direct effect on my reality. When I was a white nationalist skinhead, I looked through a lens that I crafted myself and that I put on, and this lens told me that because I was white, I was different than everybody else, superior to everybody else, threatened by everybody else, and at war with everyone else. This lens resulted in the murders of two of my friends. It resulted in a lot of my other friends going to prison. It resulted in countless harm to innocent people that I can't even begin to catalog. It resulted in 2 suicide attempts on my part. It could say 3. It could be argued my entire 7-year span in this was an ongoing suicide attempt. This lens resulted directly in suffering. Today, I also look through a lens that I crafted myself and that I put on and that I spend a daily time practicing to maintain. And this lens tells me that we human beings have more in common than different, that our human experience that we all co create every moment is something to be grateful for. It's a basically primally good thing. And even when it sucks, it's an opportunity to practice love and compassion for each other. It's the embodiment of Chardikala, of relentless optimism. And that's a lens as well. That's a lens that I adopt, and every single human being has that power to craft the lens that they look at the world through, and nobody can take that away from them. So I would like everyone to leave tonight empowered with that truth and to be mindful of how we're looking at the world and what stories we believe that shape our relationship with the world. And I think if we all do that and we listen to each other and we serve each other, and if we're not terrified of each other, there's really nothing that human beings can't accomplish. And I think that our mental, physical, emotional, spiritual relationship with firearms in this country is seriously out of whack. Coming from a household where I fired firearms the second I could hold them, I'm 48 years old, and I've spent at least a good 40 years, if not more, shooting guns and being surrounded by firearms. It wasn't until very recently I was in Spain a few years ago, and I had a friend there. He's just like, I've never touched a gun in my life, and I have no desire to, like, at all. And I'm just like, wow, that's crazy. Like that was strange to me. That firearms are so normalized in our country, and we have 310 something million people here, and there are more guns than people in this country. It's an incredibly imposing problem just logistically. Like, where do you even begin to address this issue? But you're right. I think beyond that, beneath that, is where is that relationship between a man and his firearms? And I specifically say man because I think there's definitely a gendered aspect here. Um, I believe that really all human violence boils down to testosterone mismanagement. And that doesn't necessarily mean that like women are incapable of violence, but anytime you are looking at a case where a woman commits violence, you can connect like 1 or 2 dots to some asshole guy that seriously that drove her to suffer to the point where she's committing that violence. So I think as men, we have to ask ourselves what healthy masculinity looks like, what security in yourself, in your being, and what true strength looks like. To me, strength is being unafraid to show my vulnerabilities. Strength isn't pretending you have no vulnerabilities and pounding your chest and acting like nothing ever scares you. Strength is saying I'm afraid that people aren't going to love me. I'm afraid that I'm not good enough to take care of my family. And I think when men are unable to say those things and face those feelings and face those vulnerabilities, guns are a means to compensate from that. So they're like, well, rather than go through the very difficult process of facing that vulnerability, they can just hoard guns around them. And you can see this in the I watched the internet happen. It's like I'm part of that generation where the internet wasn't a thing till I was in my mid-20s, and I spent way too much time in the comment section. I've seen the comment section evolve as it has from email comments to web to app to what have you. But anytime there's a story about a crime happening or a story about a shooting, there's somebody in that comments going, I let somebody break into my house. I got a 45 ACP with laser safety slugs, and I'll be waiting for them, right? I mean, they're just like meditating on the opportunity to use their gun. And it strikes me how sick that is, like how wrong that is. And I'm not casting derision upon the people making those comments. I mean, I really, like, my heart breaks for them to think that that's something noble, to just like and I, at the same time, I this isn't always true, but as someone who has perpetrated a lot of violence, I have an aversion to violence. Like, I don't want to hurt people. I don't want to get in fights anymore. I don't want to kill people. And I think a lot of times when people are talking about these daydreams of using their guns, it makes me think like they haven't really seen violence happen, and they don't know what they're talking about. But I think all those things come into play in our national conversation on guns. And to me, the way to sum it up is that we as a nation need to take firearms seriously, and we don't right now. When I bought my last firearm, and I am a gun owner still, I have people who threaten my life, and I have a 12 gauge shotgun at home. And about the same time I bought this shotgun, my daughter wanted to adopt a cat from the Humane Society. And I went through far more scrutiny and jumped through far more hoops to adopt that cat, who I love dearly. He's my gatito, and I'm so happy to have him. I miss him, actually. I haven't seen him in a week. But more power to the Humane Society. You want to take it seriously. You're adopting this creature. You're taking it into your life. But to have us put more scrutiny on adopting an animal than buying a deadly weapon is a serious problem, and we need to fix it. It's a really interesting lens to view our story through, the lens of the American dream. Our story is essentially of two boys born on opposite sides of the planet Earth. One whose family came to the United States of America looking for a better life, looking for that American dream. And I think your family probably had a good idea of what that was. I was born with the American dream handed to me on a silver platter, and I spent my life scraping and clawing to get away from it. I grew up in a nice suburb of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Nice house, nice neighborhood. I never went hungry. I never took a beating. My parents were together. They both loved me very much. They let me know this at every turn. In fact, I was showered in positive affirmation as a kid. He's so wonderful. He's so gifted. He can do anything. I was just this golden boy that all the adults in my life would fawn over and talk about how amazing I was. But underneath the exterior, there was emotional violence in our house from my father's alcoholism. My father wasn't an abusive drunk. He was what I call a fun drunk. When my dad was drunk, we were going to shoot off guns and fireworks. And what could be more fun for a little boy? That was normal to me. Pardeep has since informed me that's not normal. But me growing up, that was normal.
They did that in the basement of their house.
Yeah, we had a pistol range in the basement.
That's not normal.
My poor mother, who would at times be working two jobs to keep the bills paid and the lights on in our nice house in a nice neighborhood, literally would be hearing pistols fired in the basement well past midnight, as my dad would be down there with his friends, and my little brother and I, as soon as we could hold a pistol, we were down there shooting with them. My father has a disease, and despite his disease, he loved me very much, and he did the best he could. But his relationship with my mother was horrible. My mom was constantly stressed out. I could tell she was miserable as I grew up. And my mother's misery hurt me. And rather than be a good kid and be like, hey, Mom, I love you, how can I help? I started to distance myself from her and from my father and from all the adults in my life who loved me and supported me, which of course made my suffering worse. And as my suffering grew, I started to pass it on to other kids. I was a bully on the school bus in kindergarten. I started to get a thrill from it. And the more or rush I got from this thrill of causing havoc at school, of disrupting things, the more it became like an addiction. I am an alcoholic myself, in addition to being a former white nationalist. And I see the parallels between violent extremist ideologies and addiction. The first time I drank beer, I was 14 years old. I probably had 4 or 5 beers and then I passed out. I quit drinking in 2004 when I was 34 years old. And by the time I quit drinking, my magic number was 18 beers, which was how many beers I could drink at night and still function the next day. This is an example of how the substance, the amount of substance it takes to get high, keeps escalating as the addiction progresses. So, as a little kid, just bullying a kid on the school bus got to be old, so I had to organize other kids to beat up this kid or get in fights in the schoolyard. It escalated to breaking and entering, to vandalism, drinking myself when I'm 14. By the time I'm 16, I'm a full blown alcoholic. I had been violent since I was a little kid. Violence was a normal thing to me, and hate was just another part of the rush. That's who I was when I heard white power skinhead music telling me that I was a white warrior fighting for my race, which is in danger of extermination at the hands of an ominous Jewish conspiracy that's been going on for thousands of years. Now, I hope that sounded ridiculous to everyone in this room. It should, it is. But to 16-year-old Arno, it was literally music to my ears. And not because I was an anti Semite looking for other anti Semites, but because I had this addiction to repulsing people and shocking people, and nothing repulses people and shocks people like a swastika.
That day, people had a choice. They could have went home. That Sunday, they could have went home. They could have went on with their lives. That same day, as this minority group was going through their one of the worst times that they have faced in uh, present day America, people made the conscious choice to say, "No, I'm not going home, and I'm going to go to this place of prayer and worship." And that day, I saw people of all different complexions and faces and races and religions come together, and I was like, and I looked around, and it wasn't lost on us, even as we were going through that, of like, wow, wow, in our prayer, and really we haven't talked about Sikhi, and I see, Sikh brothers and sisters here. Sikhi is the fifth biggest religion in the world, and there was little known about who Sikhs were and what they represented. Every Sikh prayer, as we leave for that day, there's a prayer that we say, and I didn't, as a boy, you kind of don't know why you say some things, right? You just kind of go to church, or you go to synagogue, or you go to the masjid or the gurdwara, and you just kind of sit there and you reflect and you pray. You feel better when you come out. But this particular prayer is one that Sikhs say, and at every single gurdwara they say it before they leave, and it is Nanak Nam Chardi Kala Tere Bane Sarbat Tapala. Arno has Chardi Kala tattooed right here, right? And Chardi Kala means relentless optimism, that you shall be relentlessly optimistic. But the whole saying means you shall be relentlessly optimistic for the peace and prosperity of all mankind. And I was like, man, why would they like, and then it dawns on you of like all of this foundational teaching that we are all given, this spiritual foundation, wherever that's taken to, like this calling, right? These things, you might have thought that, hey, my buddy invited me to come to this. My teacher told me that we're going to take the whole entire high school class. Or, a lot of times when we go to things, we think that, oh, it just happened. Me just meeting Arnold just happened, right? That shooting happening that day, it just happens. Nothing happens like that. There's always a purpose, right? It's just whether our creativity and our spirituality sees that purpose, right? And even that day when people made that conscious choice to show up at that gurdwara, I can tell you without going into too much detail that each and every one of I heard from people who were inside the gurdwara at the time. Each and every person in there made the most purposeful prayer that they could with their last final breaths. And I was fine with that, saying, you know what? They died in the place that was our sanctuary, our community.
I was at peace with that, that they died praying for themselves. And then I thought about what immigrants represent, how much they do for other people, how much they sacrifice for their children and the community. And I know as a fact today that those people that prayed that last breath, the people that you might have lost in your own personal lives, when they prayed that last breath, that purposeful prayer, right? You are the living example of that purposeful prayer. We got 800 some people here tonight. Nothing happens by happenstance. Right? You are the answer to dying people's prayers. And and that's what I want you to leave out with tonight is that once we leave out these doors, we take that door and we have a responsibility. You have a responsibility not only just to the world, but you have a responsibility to yourself and to be there for one another. Share communication with somebody that's here tonight. Follow up, stay committed. This is your community, this is our community. There are going to be people that you can reach that I can't. There's going to be people that you can reach that Arno cannot. You know the next person out there who is suffering, who is isolated, who is going to do something drastic, right? Go out and reach that person. And I know that sometimes to go ahead and reach that person, it's exhausting, right? But that's our spiritual challenge.
Behaving in a way that someone's trying to provoke you is not resistance. It's capitulation. And when I was a white nationalist skinhead, everything I did was meant to provoke hostility from people. It was meant to cultivate hatred in the world around me. And if that hate was directed at me, it was all the better. That meant that I won. And so I wanted people to not just hate me, I wanted people to swing at me. I wanted to brawl. And I got my ass kicked as often as I beat anybody else up. It wasn't a matter of like whether I won or lost the fight. It was a matter of I wanted violence, and if I got it, I won. But rather than reflect my hostility as I was trying to provoke, there were very brave people like a Jewish boss and a lesbian supervisor and black and Latino coworkers who were like, no, I'm not going to let you dictate the rules of engagement in our interaction. Instead, I'm going to dictate the rules, which is kind of a good rule of thumb when you're in a conflict. We were talking about my concussions earlier. I have post-concussion syndrome now, so even though I'm still like a big, scary-looking dude, I get a concussion if you look at me funny. So I'm not the brawler that I used to be, but just to illustrate the point, I'll ask people often, I'll be like, okay, if you and I were going to fight in a steel cage, would you rather make the rules or do you want me to make the rules? And 10 people out of 10 say, hey, I'd rather make the rules. So that's the question we need to ask ourselves when we are confronted with hate. And it doesn't mean rolling over. It doesn't mean letting people walk all over you. It means not letting someone dictate the way that you engage with them. And so every time brave people treated me with kindness rather than reflecting my hatred, it indicated how wrong I was in an incredibly powerful way. And there were times actually where I fled. I like ran away from people who treated me with kindness because it just messed me up so much. And every act of kindness planted a seed in my heart. And it's very important to understand that these seeds, like any other seed, don't grow instantly. You're not going to take a flower seed from the store, put it in a little piece of dirt, and then instantly have a beautiful flower. You have to prepare the soil. You have to water it. You have to cultivate it. And if you do all these things right, a flower will bloom. Well, the seeds that were planted in my heart by these acts of kindness, it sometimes took 7 years to come to fruition. But after 7 years of involvement, I was so exhausted that I was looking for an excuse to lead. And that excuse came in a two-stage process. In 1994, early in the year, my girlfriend and I broke up, and I became a single parent to our 18-month-old daughter. Go figure, but hate and violence and alcohol is not a recipe for a healthy relationship between a man and a woman. And a couple months later, a second friend of mine was murdered in a street fight. By that time, I had lost count of how many friends had been incarcerated, so it finally hit me that if I didn't change my ways, death or prison was going to take me from my daughter. And I really believe that those acts of kindness were instrumental in getting me to that point, along with the my parents' love, both my mom and my dad, for all the challenges that they faced. They refused to give up on me, and their love was absolutely steadfast, and that was a huge factor. That combined with other elements of exhaustion brought me to that point where those two catalyst events led me out of hate groups.
How many of you have heard of safe spaces? Most everybody. So, as we were talking at the library earlier, oftentimes we get into the discussion of academia and what are safe spaces, and we got to understand that they're subjective, right? To some people, a lot of society is a safe space. They can go into certain places and feel okay. Then over here, these are scary spaces, right? And that's also subjective. Oftentimes, when we do our learning, it's this place right in the middle. Here's your safe space. Here's a scary space, and in the middle is this sacred space. And really, the sacred space was where I had to find myself navigating. Um, we sit in front of you 7, almost 8 years later. We were in a different parts of our life. There was some actual, like, real processing that needed to happen. And I think about 2 years after we met, I called Arno on a Sunday, and I said, "Man, thank you." And he's like, "For what?" I'm like, "Just thank you for always being there, but for lovingly challenging where I was." Because when things happen to people, they can. I mean, it's kind of a fork in the road. You can either get bitter, or you can get better. And oftentimes, the difference between getting bitter and getting better is you have to change one letter, the most important letter, which is I. Right? And I can tell you from a personal perspective of my family, right? I have seen my brother go into a different path where he has gotten bitter, and forgiveness just didn't enter his vocabulary, nor did it enter his spirit. And when we do talk about forgiveness, oftentimes we think about it in the sense of, oh, I forgot about what happened to me. That's an impossibility. The mind doesn't forget. The spirit doesn't forget. But what forgiveness really looks like, and I'm going to use a story about a person who's locked up, and this person is locked up and they're on death row, and the next day they're going to be executed. So they go up to the warden. The warden goes up to them and says, "Hey, you're going to be executed tomorrow. I'll give you one of two choices. Tonight I can make you comfortable. I can get you whatever you want, and tomorrow you can just be executed. Or you can take that door over there." And so the prisoner asks, "What's that door over there lead to?" And he says, "The scariest things that you have approached in your life, all of the anxieties that you have." Right? And so the prisoner says, "Well, no, I'll just be executed tomorrow. I'm cool being comfortable." And sometimes that's what our lives look like. We're cool being comfortable, and the next day, you know, we're dead. We lived our life. Right? So he chooses that. Um, the next day, the guard comes up to the warden and says, "Warden, what was behind that door over there?" And the warden says, "Freedom." This road, this path, whatever that is, whatever spirit was pushing me towards forgiveness, but little did I know it was pushing me towards freedom. I would, I have 4 beautiful children today. I have a wonderful life. I get to talk with wonderful community. I get to be part of this discussion, work with my brother, and really help lead off these discussions with the Levine Center. None of that is possible if you truly don't go through the process of forgiveness. And forgiveness to me doesn't it's forgiveness to me means vengeance. Okay, we need to say that it's not some kind of like this is just some nice thing where I'm just gonna turn the other cheek, or it means vengeance. You're freeing yourself. Um, my my children, oftentimes they ask me, and they're like, what was what was your grandfather like? what was my grandfather like? What was they haven't seen him. But I said your grandfather was one that was wise, but he had a short memory, meaning that he didn't hold grudges too long, because you knew that holding grudges only really ate you up. So as far as that goes, that was my road to forgiveness. But it didn't take. It wasn't just like it happened like that. It really was a process. And over the years, I've worked with sexual assault clients. I've worked with survivors of violence. I've worked with other people. And the question that we sometimes get is, can you prescribe forgiveness to me? What would my forgiveness look like? And that's like asking, can you prescribe God to me? Can you prescribe religion to me? Uh, It's not a prescription. It's something that you have to participate in. And I can't tell you what your road looks like. I couldn't tell clients that I worked with who, oftentimes I represented to them the perpetrator of violence. As I'm working with women, I represented to them the perpetrator of violence. And oftentimes people say, well, how does that feel being in that space? I was like, I love it. I love it because I can lovingly challenge them to a better place, to have a relationship again. And but I couldn't say to them what their recipe should look like. That would be irresponsible to say this is what it should look like. But I could tell them that this is the journey that is worth taking.
Serve to Unite is essentially arts driven service learning and global engagement. So we would go to our young people and be like, hey, what issues are you concerned about in this world? And they would say something like, we're concerned about community police relationships. So we're going to facilitate a solution driven way for them to address that problem in partnership with police so that the police are learning from this as well. And we're changing the way that the police community relationship looks. That's one of a pile of examples. Our students have addressed things like homelessness, veterans issues, genocide prevention, human trafficking, environmental issues, racism, Islamophobia, like every problem you can think of. Our young people had said, yeah, I want to do something about that. And they come together to roll up their sleeves and put in the work to address that issue. And as they're doing that side by side, you get a sense of like, hey, I'm worth something. I'm valuable. I can make an impact on society. And if I can make an impact on society, if I can put a dent in these problems and approach them, maybe I can approach my own problems as well. And I can offer myself to my friends and my peers, and we can all help each other heal. So Serve to Unite is that process in partnership with an amazing roster of people we call global mentors. These are people from all over the world, some of whom are former violent extremists like myself, some are survivors of violent extremism like Pardeep, who connect with our students via telepresence into the classroom and not only inspire them with their stories, but then kind of consult on the service learning projects.
My past is I was a police officer for 5 years in one of the roughest neighborhoods in Milwaukee, 53206, for those that have been to Milwaukee. And I became an educator in that same neighborhood and started working with what the state labeled at-risk high school youth. Either they were behaviorally, academically, or sometimes both challenged. And shortly after me and Arno met, we started to do these talks. And one of our first high schools we went to was pretty close to where the shooter lived, called Cudahy High School. And when we spoke to the principal about doing this talk, he's like, well, talk to the entire student body. We're like, how many students you got? Oh, about 1,100, 1,200. Oh, okay. Sure. And so we go do this talk, and before leading the days leading up to it, there had already been 3 suicides that had happened at the school. But the school told us, don't talk about the elephant in the room. Don't mention that. We're like, this is a culture problem. There's something going on. One, two, we have a culture problem. So creatively, we that day we just said, okay, let's just turn off all the lights and we'll observe a moment of silence for everybody. And oh, perfect. Thank you. And so we had a moment of silence,
And you could literally hear in the crowd, probably a minute long, you could hear kids, and these are kids, high school kids, just crying and sobbing over the last suicide. And some people walking out, stepping out. I'm like, there is that much pain that is happening within our schools that I don't think that we are even connecting to. After the talk, there was about 20 kids. I lined up on one side, Arnold lined up on the other side. As much as we get to talk here, most of our talks are not even talks because we're just listening. And so we want to be accessible to everybody here. And because we won't be able to answer all the questions, you can always hit us up on Facebook or Twitter. And if there's something that is really pressing on your hearts and minds, contact us. Hey, I didn't get to ask this question, but I want to. Arno Michaelis, the what is fifth, fourth?
Arno R. Michaelis the fourth on
Yeah.
Facebook. Yeah.
Arno R. Michaelis the fourth, and Pardeep Kaleka. So if there's something that's pressing, but our work with youth really started to go into, we need to change the structure. We need to change the way that education even works. When we were growing up, and this is back in the day, right? So Arnold was kind of alluding to, we didn't have the internet. We didn't have cell phones. My education looked like me getting a topic from my teacher and saying, okay, what is that topic? And then me going to get an Encyclopedia Britannica. And for those that don't know what an Encyclopedia Britannica is, it, it is a book that you really have to. So we would have about 4 pages on
It
a.
was Google on paper.
It was like Google on paper, but not enough information. So our job was really to elaborate on just 4 pages, right? We would reference that, and all the old heads in here are like, yeah, I remember having to be creative with 4 pages of something. If you Google something right now, what is the issue that the students have right now? They have to concise. So our job back in those times was to elaborate. Educational systems now have to find what is credible, right? That looks completely different, and we're having education that looks completely the same, and asking why it's not serving the needs of our students. So building in social and emotional intelligence from the time that a child can walk in our academic structures would be wise for us. Having a class that's strictly dedicated to restorative practices and understanding what mental health looks like.